Before we hear from Jane Higa, our speaker, we're going to sing a song that's it's just wonderful to sing before anyone speaks. It's entitled Speak, O Lord, and we'll be singing that in just a moment. But I want you to know that right after the song is sung, Jane Higa, our Dean of Student Life here at Westmont College, has been here 20-plus years, was a graduate of this school, spent a few years in exile at Biola after getting her degree at USC. Jane is a woman of vast experience and wisdom. Plus, she's as warm and engaging a person as I've ever met. It's a privilege to know Jane, and you're going to feel like you know her just a bit when you hear her speak. But let's ask the Lord to speak through Jane, his servant.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's so great to see you all here. And part of what's fun about being in a chapel right at the beginning of the year, I have a chance to welcome all you new students to Westmont, as well as the returning students, welcome home. It's so great to see you all here. In many ways, we're all in so much transition right now. Whether you're a new student who is just kind of finding your way in this new place, or if you're a returning student who's kind of seen Westmont in a new way, because that seems to happen every year. And so I would guess that some of you, and especially the new students, are feeling a little like a duck out of water right now. And let me tell you, it's okay. And let me also tell you that we grown-ups here can attest that this happens over and over again. We often feel like a duck out of water. And in fact, for me, it just happened this last summer. I had been asked to be a resource person at something that was sponsored by the CCCU, which is that umbrella Christian college organization that we're a part of, and it was a multi-ethnic leadership development institute. So I was supposed to come and be a resource for other people, colleagues and colleges around the country who had been identified as having some potential for senior level leadership, and we were really wanting to target professionals of color. So they were mostly faculty or academic administrators that were there. So that's kind of intimidating to kind of think of being in this group of academics in some ways, but also these people that had been really targeted as leaders in the future for Christian colleges across the nation. Well, at the last moment, I realized that I was asked not only to do a little devotional, but to actually plan the worship service. And I don't do that a lot. You know, Ben, he's a pro at it, but, you know, not so much me. And so I was feeling pretty intimidated about that, just that. And then everyone arrived, and I was the first morning, I was on the first thing in the first morning of our time. And I looked around, and 2/3 of the people that were there were African American. And there was just this almost, they were having a lot of fun, and there was almost a rowdiness to the time. And I began to be very intimidated, and I just felt like a duck out of water. Now, I have enjoyed worshiping in black churches, but it's something different about being up front. So it was, I went to bed that night very intimidated and very nervous, and very much a duck out of water. Well, it definitely was a new cultural context, a new place, new faces. It just felt completely different. I made a few adjustments that night, but mostly decided, well, you know what, Jane, you got to just go with what you have. And I had things like Wendell Berry poetry, which is my favorite thing. I had psalms that we were going to read and pray, kind of like Ben does, wanting to take all the good things from Ben Patterson wherever I go. And then, you know, and I had my little devotional thing. So I wasn't sure. It just felt very Westmont. I wasn't sure if it felt like the group that I was then with. But then I stood up and started. And part of what was so amazing to me was when you are in a crowd that is very accustomed to really participating in worship with you, which, you know, we often have heard when a black speaker comes up, come on, can someone give me an amen? And then a few of you try to do a little amen. But because we're not so accustomed. But what was so fun for me was I'm up there and I'm doing this thing, and they are just giving me all this response and affirmation. And all of a sudden, I found myself pacing around and gesturing with big hands. and my voice was getting more animated, and it was just kind of fun. All of a sudden, I realized I am really enjoying myself here. And all of a sudden, I had a new sense of why black preachers preach the way they do, with all of that coming at you. There is something that just is very powerful. And then how God can use you when you are kind of freed from the things that you feel you just need to do, and there's just this real openness that begins to happen. So for me, I was a duck out of water who realized sometimes completely new situations, not only can we survive them, but we can learn new things in them, and we can become different people and bigger people and new people in ways that we wouldn't have known before. So that was the main story that came to mind when I thought about some of you who might be feeling like a duck out of water. Well, one of the things at Westmont that we think is very important is that you learn to embrace change. And not just that you could survive it, but you would begin to believe that change is important, and that we come to college in many ways to find ways to open ourselves up to the change that God has for us. And not only do we want to tell you to go out there and embrace it, but we want to be guides that can help you navigate it. And so today, as you're in the middle of all kinds of change, I thought that it might be a good thing to talk about is what are some things that I've learned over time that have really been helpful for me as I try to navigate change, and it's still something I am working on to learn to really embrace change, because I'm someone who kind of likes things just the way they've always been. But I want to encourage you as you are starting this new year to embrace the change that is ahead. One of the things that has become really important to me is, and I think a key, is to really embrace change by remembering God's faithfulness in the past. In past times of change, whether it is stories that you've heard from your families or from others around you, or your own experience of God's faithfulness in the midst of change, is something really important. I know that for myself, my own light is dim and unsteady, and there are times that I can feel very faithful and very clear, and other times when I just kind of lose all of that. And so there are times that my own light is certainly not enough to help me to navigate change. As I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite poets is Wendell Berry, and I want to read you a poem that just seemed to come back to me as I was thinking about this time in chapel. This is Wendell Berry from his book, A Timbered Choir. I leave the warmth of the stove, my chair and book, and go out into the cold night. My little lamp that shows the way and leaves me dark is swinging in my hand. The house windows shine above me, and below a single light gleams in the barn, where an hour ago I left a ewe in labor. Beyond is the grand sweep of heaven's stars. As I walk between them in the deep night, the lights of house and barn also are stars. My own small light is an unsteady star. So when I read this, these were the things that came to mind. I leave the warmth of stove, my chair and book. We're leaving behind, as we come back to Westmont or come to Westmont for the first time, the things that are comfortable to you: home, church, friends, ideas that are the most familiar and comfortable to you. Those are the lights of the house. Into the cold night, into a place like Westmont, where there are people who are so different than you, and things are different and they feel different. My little lamp that shows the way and leaves me dark is swinging in my hand. Sometimes we're walking like with a lantern, and you know how you walk and it swings, and sometimes the path is clear and sometimes not. It's unsteady. The windows shine above me, where we've come from, and below a single light gleams in the barn where an hour ago I left a ewe in labor. And that's the work he is going to be doing. And for you as students, your work now is to be a student at Westmont. So the barn is where you are going. It's this place. And then beyond is the grand sweep of heaven's stars. God, who is our refuge and our steady light that guides us and leads us through any kind of thing that begins to feel like it's change or hard. And as I walk between them in the deep night, the lights of house and barn, and also the stars, my own small light, is an unsteady star. But together we can make it, is what I felt so strongly from this poem. So you do see our light flickers, as we're walking from house to barn. But God is the one that provides that steady light. And the light that was at home and the light that is among us, and just sitting here looking at all of you, the relationships that you're beginning to form, the contacts you have with faculty, the time in the classroom, the time in the residence halls talking to your RA or RD, these are all the lights that are a part of the barn that's Westmont that you are coming to. And I'm sure that many of you now feel different things. For those of you that are first years, it really is like being a duck out of water. New place, new people. You were so known from where you came from, and all of a sudden it's all new. But also for the others, some of you as sophomores are needing to think about picking a major, and all of a sudden this feels a little more serious than it did last year. For many of you, you have your tight circle of friends, but people are now on off-campus programs, and what felt so very secure is no longer. And for those of you that are seniors and beginning to think about graduating, it's all the things about the economy that you hear every day. You turn on the news or look at the newspaper, and you realize that there is an unsure future ahead. And what began to be so much like home here, all of a sudden begins to feel unsteady. And then your light falters. And that's just setting aside all the other things that may be going on in your individual lives, things that are hard at home or things that are confusing that are going on in your own lives. And so there is this unsteadiness in the midst of change. There are wonderful stories that I have had of God's faithfulness to me and how He has been the one that has prepared me for the thing that was ahead. And one story that came to mind happened last spring. And it actually happened at a time when I wasn't even knowing that I was going into something big and challenging. And it was just one of those surprises that came to me. I had a Bible study, and my home group meets on Tuesday night. And I was racing to do a little Bible study before I go to home group. But it was Tuesday morning, and I had to get into Westmont, and then we met Tuesday night. So I'm sure none of you do this, cram a Bible study preparation, because I know you're much more, spiritual than I am in that regard. But I was just like, I just got to read enough of the study, enough of these verses, so I can at least sound, somewhat thoughtful about the things we were going to talk about. So I was in that mode. And while I was in that mode, in the study, we were asked to read Psalm 91. And it was amazing to me how God, even when we are that distracted, can at times just come through and be a voice in our life. And this is Psalm 91. And especially the verses 1, 2, and 4 were the ones that spoke to me. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust Him. He will cover you with His feathers. He will shelter you with His wings. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. It was just one of those moments. Now, I have read this psalm before, but tears started streaming down my face, and I had this sense, especially imagining myself being in this nest with the feathers of God, keeping me warm and protecting me, this gentle love that He has and His protection. And it was one of those very sacred moments. And in many ways, I had a hard time thinking of, what do you call this when this happens? And just this last summer, because the faculty go on retreats, do you know that? But faculty were going on a faculty retreat, and we were encouraged to read different books that were authored by different faculty members here. And I chose to read a book by Paul Willis in English, and the book is entitled Bright Shoots of Everlastingness. And somehow, it just seemed to capture it. I had experienced one of those bright shoots of everlastingness, when you taste all of who God is and all of what is ahead of us and how much he loves us. And so I began calling these, I've now begun calling these kinds of moments bright shoots of everlastingness. And just today, we have sung about God's everlasting love, as well as the protection that we have in the shadow of his wings. And those are two things that just began to be something so clear to me as I read these scriptures. And so tears are streaming down my face, and I am just so touched by God. And at that same time, I look up, and there is this print by a retired faculty member here, Tony Askew, who was one of the most marvelous people around. But I have a print in my kitchen, and I looked up at this print, and again, my tears kept on streaming because the print, and I've looked at this print for years, but this time it just held new meaning for me. In the center is a circle, and it's got yellow kinds of tones, and then there are 2 bars on the side, and then these stripes on top and bottom. And somehow, as I was looking at it, all of a sudden these verses again came back to me, and I could see myself right in the center there with God's protection and love over me, and all the ways in which he surrounded me all around, and that I was loved and protected, that he was my refuge. And it was one of those moments, again, that I just thought, Lord, you now not only have given me your word to guide me, but you've also given me this image to carry with me. And I felt that in my head and in my heart, these things were just so vivid, and they still are to this day. And this is months later. I remember telling Ben about this, because we get together once a week, and I was telling him about this strange thing that happened. I didn't know it was a bright shoot of everlastingness at the time, but it was a bright shoot of everlastingness. And I said, I really don't know why God gave this to me, because I wasn't in the midst of any kind of struggle. And what was interesting was just 24 hours after that began a really challenging time for me, feeling the weight of responsibility that I had in my role. And I don't want to get into any of the details of that, but what was amazing was those verses in Psalm 91, and that image was the thing that carried me for the next weeks and months that finished out our spring semester. God is so faithful to us in the ways that he loves us, and in the ways that he protects us and reminds us that he is here in the midst of hard things. And I began to just constantly kind of carry that image of being like held in this nest with all these little feathers that have been woven in to kind of make it soft for me, and the wings. In many ways, I began to think of God as my mama bird. And it was just a very sweet kind of image. Well, each of us have times like this when God makes himself real to us, times when we see his faithfulness in the midst of change. And as we begin this year, I want to encourage you to stop and remember the times that God has been faithful to you. We often kind of forget when we're in the midst of a challenge, and we forget the way God has been faithful to us in the past. And we're no different. We're very human. It's one of the things that come with being human. And the Israelites were certainly very human. And one of the things that I began to think about was what God would tell them in order for them to remember, so that we don't forget. And I want to encourage you along this line. So, do you remember the time when the Israelites needed to cross the Jordan River? And it was at flood stage, and so there was kind of how we were going to get across. And God actually kind of stopped the flow of the water so they could cross the River Jordan. I just want to read you those verses. In Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. When all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men that he had chosen. one from each of the tribes of Israel. He told them, "Go into the middle of the Jordan, in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you will tell them, 'They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Jordan forever.'" And that's what I'd like you to do. Take time, even take some time just right now to think about, and if you have paper, to even jot it down. We don't have stones to carry, but think about the times that God has been faithful to you. And some of that is faithful to your family. Sometimes it's generations back, grandparents and great-grandparents who have sacrificed so much in order that you might live the life that you're living right now. In many ways, we stand on the shoulders of so many who have gone before us. And think about them. Think about the kinds of things you have learned over the years and times of where you can know that God was faithful. So take a few minutes and just think about that. As you remember these things, hold them in your heart. And if you didn't write them down now, write them down when you go back to your rooms. Because these are the things that carry us when there is so much change that goes on in our lives. Things always feel like they're a little bit in transition. It is the kinds of things that where we remember God's faithfulness in the past, when our own light becomes unsteady, that's when we need to be reminded through the things that have happened in your past as well as through the lives of people around you. I really invite all of you as a community to care for each other in that way, because we need that word of encouragement often in our lives. And the good news is, look at this rich array of people you have around you who want to walk with you on this journey. So welcome to this new year. Welcome to the journey ahead. Know that each journey is going to be unique. And don't feel bad if yours feels different than other people's journey. Know that the light of home is something that will always be shining, and that you don't need to feel that you have cut that off and that light will falter and not continue to shine. And then know that the light in the barn, this place, will be part of the light that will help you walk when your own lantern gets unsteady. But most of all, remember the lights in heaven. God, who is so faithful to us, who holds us and protects us in his hand, who binds us all around us with his armor that we might be able to walk the journey that is so hard for us. Let me pray.